This is a story about data.
Ball figure mowing round the wicket. Bowls for Duminy in that sweet position very early. In fact, early enough for Stokes. 2, maybe 3. Oh, they've got 4. There's a misfield out there.
Yeah, I know. Data stories can be as dull as watching a 3-day cricket match. But this is a story about the kinds of data we use every day to help us understand our world. It's about how data and justice, real justice, are linked. And ultimately, how justice is undermined by data that isn't properly thought through. Okay, we'll start off gently. We'll think about it in terms that we can all relate to. Let's think about grade school. Let's pretend you're a teacher. It's between classes, and another teacher comes up and tells you that 2 of the 11-year-old male students in your homeroom have had a fight. One's been injured and is in the hospital. When you ask what happened, you're told,
"The fight took place at 125 in an East Wing hallway. One of the students is white and the other is Asian."
If that's me, I'm probably asking something like, yeah, but what happened? And then you'll find out that that's all you get. There's no further data. Okay, let's ask an actual teacher.
My name is Amelie Krikorian. I am a 3rd grade teacher at Lee's Corner Elementary School in Virginia.
So, Amelie, given what you've just heard, what disciplinary action would you take when presented with the hypothetical I just gave? 2 11-year-old male students, one white, one Asian, had a fight at 125 in an East Wing hallway.
This is impossible to make a rational decision based on this information.
She couldn't tell me anything about fault or blame or whether race was involved. Well, I guess that makes sense. I mean, how can you tell what's going on if all you know is race and gender and time and date and age of the people involved and where something happened? You can't. So let's get back to the story about data. This past September, Jack Summers, the assistant news editor at HuffPost UK, had a story. An expert, he said, found that statistics on the use of force by officers of the Metropolitan Police, London's police force, showed systemic racial discrimination by officers. Between April and July, Summers wrote, 36% of the 12,605 people subjected to police force were black. Black people are around 13% of London's population. See, the headline was that for the first time ever, this past August, the Met released a report that tallied up all the times Met officers used force. It covered the period from April to June 2017. This is part of a wider use of force reporting effort across the UK. On its face, the report is really interesting. It's the culmination of years of planning and argument, and in addition to race and gender, it includes things about the type of force used, from touching to handcuffing to taser application and pepper spray to punches, kicks, grabs, etc. But it doesn't matter how good Summers' expert is, because nobody could draw meaningful conclusions about the effect of race on the use of force by Met officers, because the data set is bad. The Met's report fails to provide any meaningful insight into whether police use of force in London is just. Now, I don't mean to claim that the Met isn't racist, or that it is racist. I personally think that their officers are fantastic, and I don't personally believe that they're racist, but that's irrelevant. What I am saying is that the data provided is insufficient for any serious researcher to conclude anything about race and policing, or even about the use of force in general. There's data, but it is so incomplete as to mean you can't draw from it any racial equity conclusions. As researchers, when we examine a police use of force, we seek to understand why force was used. If you know why it was used, we're able to tell you, for example, whether it shouldn't have been used, whether it was justified under the law. To do this right, and if you were ever accused of something, you'd probably expect that it gets done right, we'll want to learn everything we can about the use of force and the incident. For example, we want to know the type of incident to which the officer responded, like an assault, a homicide, a robbery. Whether the person against whom force was used had injured other civilians before police arrived, or injured any officers, or whether the civilian had brandished a weapon, and so on. The Met didn't provide any of those data points, because the form that they're required to use, the politicized, government-created summary form, only provides race and gender, time and date, age of the people involved, and where the use of force happened. And it took years and millions of pounds just to get to this point. The right way to do this would have been to employ a team with operational policing experience and strategic data gathering and statistical analysis chops to determine the data that they would need to examine in order to conclude whether racial disparity exists, and if so, exactly where. That's not what happened. The result is that as political fodder, these data are excellent. But as tools, as a measure of justice in England, they do more harm than good. They create a sense of injustice, but we don't really know what's going on. This has significant implications for U.S. policing, as organizations like PERF, the Police Executive Research Forum, point regularly to the UK as the bee's knees when it comes to use of force. Maybe it is. Maybe it isn't. I put it to you that they, you, we just don't know. The Metropolitan Police are actually very good at gathering data and at providing information when asked about what they're doing. What they're not that good at is analyzing the data that they gather. Blame austerity measures that have decimated the analyst ranks, blame terrible technology, but in the end, we have a force that's just not great at exploring their own data. To investigate this, I've spoken with current and past Met officers, and I participated in a back and forth with the Met's Information Rights Unit, during which they partially refused to provide data I requested. Refusal is the technical term. They weren't being Oblomovs. They literally don't know whether the data I seek exists because of the way they're required to count. This leaves inexperienced data analysts, like journalists, with an unchallenged conclusion that race is the apparent primary driver to use of force.
Scotland Yard is accused of various things, racist, suggestions of bungled investigations into death due to racism, suggestions of racist officers, and also suggestions...
And in the absence of any contextual data, the public is left to contemplate a disproportionate value to the race of suspects and officers. Worst of all, this was preventable. And none of it helps to answer the fundamental question in which we are all interested. Why are our officers using force? The Met replied that they didn't know if they had the data I sought, but that it would require, at a rate of 1 incident per minute, a bare minimum of more than 210 hours of their work to review all 12,600 use of force forms in scope. In reality, of course, the work would be much more time-consuming. Let me be clear, they didn't say they wouldn't do it, just that I'd have to pay them to do it. In order to answer my questions, they told me, they would have to view the details on every form and try to cross-reference these, like names, dates of birth, borough locations, etc., with information that could potentially be recorded on the free text fields in other electronic systems, like CAD, CrimInt, or even NSPIS, the dreaded National Strategy for Police Information Services. Why? The Met's Shannon Stroud told me, other than a custody number for those arrested, there are no reference numbers on the use of force forms filled in by constables. Wait, what? I mean, how could they have to manually do this? Well, all right, there's a dirty little secret here, which is that with all the millions of pounds the Met has spent on their information systems, a lot of them are not purpose-built for the kind of interconnected, data-rich applications that contemporary policing needs. For example, the first system that they mentioned, CAD, Computer-Aided Dispatch, it's kind of, well...
Beaver 232, report localizer established runway 279.
The Metropolitan Police Department's CAD began life as a baggage handling system at Heathrow Airport. I'm not kidding. Regardless of what you've seen on Person of Interest, police data systems are mired in 1980s systems architecture. There was, like, hardly any automated internet data sharing under Margaret Thatcher. But when it comes to use of force, the Met's officers are gathering an avalanche of data. A few years ago, I read Wasting Police Time by a former Staffordshire cop who described the more than 4 hours of paperwork he'd have to do after an arrest. He'd needed to fill in the FCS, the file cover sheet, plus forms MG1, MG3, MG4, MG5, MG6, MG6C, MG6D, MG6E, MG11, and MG15. The arrest was of a teenage boy who'd broken someone's fence. So here's the Met with all this data, but apparently the department is not digitizing it. Instead, it's now creating new data, summary data. The irony here is that in America, we would kill for this level of raw data that the British coppers are gathering. Read any academic paper or book about American policing and you'll find disconsolate pleas for more and better data. Police in the UK capture, enter, and store more data about more activities than in any American police department. Here's an idea for a solution. Instead of spending money developing new forms, the UK government should seek ways to automatically aggregate and explore the data it has already collected. This would not only save money, it would address the primary reason we collect these data, to understand and articulate transparently how fairly we're policing our citizenry. Instead, they're placed in what researchers refer to as silos. If an officer in the London Borough of Waltham Forest wants information on a crime or a criminal from the London Borough of Lambeth, it can be obtained through a computer search in the Met's systems. But if an officer in Manchester wants basic criminal information from Lambeth, not terror or warrant information for serious crimes, but say a routine check, then the information would need to be requested by Manchester, then obtained and printed out by a Lambeth officer, and faxed to Manchester. Yes, faxed. Faxes are where data go to die. It's the de-databasing of database data. It's the decomputerization of computerized data. Presumably, the Manchester officer would then have to type the faxed information into his computer. This puts the lie to the frequent observation the government needs more data. How can it know it needs more if it hasn't exploited the data it has? The United Kingdom has successfully fostered a data-collecting policing culture. It owes it to its officers and its citizens to make the most of these priceless data assets, to go from merely collecting data to having data truly drive policing.